This is Polyamory Weekly, number 30 for October 18th, 2005. Coming up on this week's show, a monogamist weighs in, a heap load of religious, spiritual, ethical talk with men of sin, and sacred hungers released. All coming up on this week's show. Hello and welcome to Polyamory Weekly, number 30 for October 18th, 2005. A warning for our under 18 age listeners. This is an adult-oriented podcast about really lascivious things like communication and honesty in relationships. If you're under 18 and looking for upfront advice and answers to questions about sex, please visit www.scarletteen.com. And if you're hearing a bit of background noise in the podcast today, that's because, well, due to an unfortunate little incident with my car, I am casting today live from my mechanic's. So if you hear that squeaky fan belt and people talking in the background, well, that's my mechanics working on my car while I'm sitting out front talking about sex and relationships. Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Minx, and this is Polyamory Weekly, Tales from the Front of Responsible Non-Monogamy from a Pansexual, Kink-Friendly Point of View. And if I'm talking really fast, it's because we have a really great show lined up for you today. So I'm just going to start zipping in through things. First of all, Eldon Blackthorne was kind enough to mention me in his audio blog at www.eldon.com/audio. And I'm not going to play the segment, but you can go listen to it if you want. But it made me think, he really set me to thinking about the listener that we talked last week about what do you do if you come out as poly and people start, hitting on you and things like that. And I sort of rambled about it last week, and once I listened to his audio cast and I thought about it, I thought, you know what? You turn somebody down exactly the same way that you would if you were monogamous and not interested. You just say, gee, thanks, I'm really flattered, but I'm not interested. There's no reason, if they have the perception that polyamory means you sleep with everybody, you can correct them on that point. But really, when it specifically comes to, do you want to be with me, turn them down in the exact same way you would turn someone down if you were monogamous and simply not interested in that person, politely and respectfully. I don't know why I didn't think of that earlier. Also, Brody was kind enough to post a link to Polyamory Weekly in the Poly Matchmaker forum. So he mentioned you might end up with a few new listeners, and commented it's really nice to have so many ways in which people can learn about polyamory, and I think your podcast makes for a great resource for poly and non-poly folks alike. And he had, but I have to say, I'm also grateful to you for giving me another justification for having an iPod. Well, anything to help you justify expensive toys. The next listener mail was from Elisade Haas, and he commented on Jacques Attali's article. Now, keep in mind that this particular listener is monogamous, and it was very long. I'm just going to read segments of it. He says, imagine my surprise when not only did nobody with my opinion write in, but apparently nobody wrote in on this topic at all. I want to comment on the article, Monogamy, Here Today, Gone Tomorrow by Jacques Attali. I found his article actively offensive on 2 counts. 1, it completely dismisses my sexual orientation, monogamous, as valid and suggests that people like me are hypocrites. 2, it sounds to me like he equates cheating on your partner with polyamory. Quote, monogamy has rarely been honored in practice. Soon it will vanish even as an ideal. End quote. Frankly, I was surprised that nobody called him out on number 2, since it seems like polyamorous folks have a lot of trouble with that assumption. Now, it is true that many people get involved in a monogamous relationship and then are unfaithful. This does not make them polyamorous, it makes them cheaters. Excellent point. I move on. It's inevitable that as the poly lifestyle becomes more acceptable to the mainstream, the percentage of the populace engaged in polyamorous relationships will increase. That's a good thing. People should be able to live the way they want as long as they're not hurting anybody, and love is good. Our paradigms are shifting, but I can no more go poly than I can turn into a fish. In Attali's world of the future, I'd have to pretend to be something I'm not, and that's not good for anybody, poly or mono, straight or bi or gay. Thanks for letting me spout off, and please keep casting. Well, thanks so much for writing in. I did mention that Attali was a little too forward, a little too chip on his shoulder for me, but you're right, nobody else wrote in to say, gee, he's assuming that everybody's poly, and that's just as offensive as everybody assuming that everyone else is monogamous and you just haven't met the right person yet. So thank you very much for writing in with that point of view. And coming up next, I had a great time sitting down with Men of Sin and talking to him about polyamory versus faith and ethics and Christianity. So here is the interview with Men of Sin discussing that. And we are here at a coffee shop. That would be the background noise that you hear with Men of Sin. I know we got some teenagers telling all kinds of cute stories in the background. With Men of Sin, who I've just confirmed is actually an ordained minister.
Indeed I am.
For how long and where?
10 years through the African Methodist Episcopal Church.
Fabulous. And I've been reading your live journal for a long time. And your article, Polyamory as the New Modern Religious Movement, caught my eye.
Yes.
So, and a couple of listeners have been asking lately about the relationship between polyamory and spirituality, and do you need to separate your faith from your ethics in order to be polyamorous?
Right.
So let's start with that first one. Is polyamory incompatible with Christianity?
In my opinion, no, because when you boil everything down to it, everything about Christianity begins and ends with love. That's the whole mission of Jesus, where his second commandment was that you love thy neighbor as thyself. So therefore, because the emphasis of Christianity really has always been about love, and because polyamory is also essentially about love, then I think the two are actually quite compatible, because they both seek to express the same type of thing, which is the love aspect of the relationships.
But isn't polygamy sort of frowned on?
Traditionally, yes.
Only in the sense that it's illegal.
Right, but it was polygamy, and I always distinguish between polygamy and polyamory, because polygamy and polyandry are so unbalanced. Polygamy only applies to, men can have as many wives as they can support, according to Judeo-Christian and Islamic scriptures. Polyamory, we can do what we want. So I think the difference is polyamory is more balanced and more equal for all those involved, where polygamy and polyandry are very one-sided and very unbalanced.
So what type of, and I apologize, since we're Christian, we're going to be talking about Christian ethics. We can discuss other, ethical faith quandaries in another podcast. What in particular do you think Christian ethics might be perceived to be in conflict with polyamory?
I think actually it really boils down to the sex aspect. The fact that we're told we can only have, it's always about the sex. Excuse me, that we're told that we can only have sex with one person, that we're supposed to be monogamous from birth, that even, and granted this is one of the things Jesus said, but you're not even supposed to even look at someone with lust. You're committing adultery. So I think the problem is we confuse, anytime we have love, you automatically throw sex in it. And anytime you throw sex in it, you're automatically supposed to lead to love. And that is where I think the conflict comes up from a Christian perspective, because they can't understand if you love someone, then you automatically must be having filthy, dirty sex with them.
So what you're saying is making me think, now was it Jesus or Paul who said, don't look at somebody with lust in your eyes?
Jesus.
It was oh yeah, that guy. Just want to confirm that.
Yes.
So the idea is that, now there's no prohibition of sex between a man and a woman.
No.
Who are married.
No.
So you are supposed to have sex with your wife, but not actually desire her or love, or lust after her.
No, actually, Paul said at one point, I forget the exact scripture, but Paul said, let the marriage bed be undefiled, which basically means that a man and a woman in a married construct can do whatever they want, as long as they're married. So I think lust applies to married people. But I think, for instance, I'm not supposed to look at the woman down the street, or you for that matter, be like, ooh, she's hot, that technically is wrong. And I have my own problems with Paul, which which we don't need to get into.
Everybody has all kinds of problems with Paul, but not a religious podcast, so we won't go into those.
Right, exactly. But I think that's where it stems from, is the issue that to even view someone else sexually is somehow akin to sin. And I've always just had a problem with that concept.
So you don't think, if it were just about love and there were no sex involved in polyamory, do you think there would be ethical issues with Christianity at all?
Probably, because you're talking about, again, sometimes you get into control issues. So you're saying, if I love more than one person,
Wait,
I'm greedy.
Religion and control? Oh, no, couldn't be.
Well, I'm the good minister, so I'm not supposed to say that. But but I do think there's a perception that those of us who are poly, we're greedy. And therefore, why can't we just have one person and be satisfied with it? And church has always taught us that we should be fulfilled with one person and one person only. When obviously, if that were the case, adultery wouldn't be an issue. Neither would the divorce rates be what they are. So it kind of runs contrast to basic human nature, I believe.
Well, that's true, but aren't the ethical restrictions posed in most religions supposed to sort of save us from our own human nature? Isn't that sort of the idea behind them?
Theoretically, yes, but I think also, let's be real, if you can, and it is, as weird as this is coming from me as a minister, if you control someone's sexuality, how much else can you control of them? So if the church says you can only do X, Y, Z, then how easy is it to control the rest of their lives? Look at the admonitions against masturbation, which are totally unbiblical, have no founding, yet the church has taught for thousands of years that masturbation, well, men masturbating, you women don't count.
Of course not. We're not spinning anything. Well, some of us aren't. Some of us do.
Yes, and that's very nice when that happens. But, if you look at that as a correlation, an act that actually harms no one, yet is still controlled. Why? Why is it an admonition against actual release? When, I forget which one, but one of the popes actually died from a seminal fluid backup.
No, that can't be true.
No, honestly, one of the early popes, I forget which one, I read it a while ago, but it is a condition.
Okay, all right, that will be pending documentation. We don't want to spread rumors here on Polyweekly. What was I going to ask you? So for these behaviors, for example, like polyamory, that technically don't really harm anyone else, why, apart from a control issue, why do many religions see, what is it that religions gain, or certain organized groups gain, from prohibiting polyamory, or from calling it unethical?
I think they gain more of, if you take less focus off yourself and your sexuality, then you can, in theory, devote more attention to the church and to God. So therefore, by restricting that type of behavior in your activities, it brings more attention to the church and people can be more faithful. When, at times the aspect of experiencing more love with more than one person can actually enhance someone's spirituality, can actually enhance a person's overall being, make them happier, make them healthier, make them smile like you.
I'm smiling and nodding.
It's not, yeah. But I think it becomes an issue of that, because sex is so sinful. And again, we come back to sex. But anything sex or lustful or anything like that is so inherently sinful, then we must remove all that sin. And so then when we're without sin, then we can be happy, faithful parishioners and follow the edicts that lay down explicitly.
I like what you were saying earlier. We sort of segued into talking about spirituality, not about sort of ethical restrictions, but about spirituality in general. And I actually can see, I don't particularly agree with, but I can sort of see the point of, if you're, it sounded actually very, I'm sorry, it sounded very letters of Paul. Don't waste your time getting married if you're not already married.
Right.
Don't waste your time trying to not be a slave if you're already a slave.
Right.
Just focus on spirituality, focus on God. Jesus is coming any second now.
Right. And remember when Paul said that, he thought the end of the world was like less than 10 years away.
Exactly,
So,
which is why, he had this sense of urgency.
Right.
Now, of course, 2,000 years later, people are taking his word as well. He said to stay a slave, so, oh, wait, nobody quotes that as being immoral. Interesting. Anyway, I digress. So what do you think is the relationship between polyamory and spirituality?
I think it is something that is defined by the individual. I think each person has the ability to define it as they see fit. For me personally, it's interlinked because my sexuality is very much tied into my spirituality. So I can't personally separate the two. Well, I can have relationships, and I have, with people who are not Christian, because that doesn't really bother me all that much. The fact remains is my expression of myself has a very big spiritual component to it. For a lot of people, I think that if they choose to, they can let polyamory enhance their spiritual life. Because the more you experience love, which can be a very spiritual emotion, then it can only enhance your overall being, and therefore it leads you into other areas where you can be satisfied and complete.
And do you have an idea how we got from this place of, I think in the last podcast I mentioned, I'm sorry, I keep accidentally,
That's okay.
quote, accidentally hitting your leg. It's
Sure.
Yeah, it's because I'm leaning into the microphone. But I mentioned something about, it's been a while since I've cracked the Bible, but I think it was the Gospel of John, which is very esoteric in the beginning. It's like the Word was God, and God was the Word, and it was good, and light, and love.
Right.
And I mean, where do we get from this sort of like Gnostic idea of love and spirituality? How did we get from there, which actually is very polycompatible, and the idea that sex and love can be very spiritual things? How did we get from that to where we are now?
Paul. Sum it up with Paul.
And now we turn in for religious conversations with Binks.
And without getting into a long dissertation, it really has to do with a shift in the followers and the Gnostics really being obliterated and Paul's followers being vaulted. And so we went from a more accepting concept of the concept of love that Jesus taught to a more restrictive concept, which Paul and the others taught afterwards. So I think that's where it comes from. Basically, it's history. Fun, isn't it?
I'm just like,
fun,
yeah,
isn't it?
It's kind of
Yes.
sad, but okay. I don't know. Anything else you want to say?
But you mentioned something about having to separate your ethics from your spirituality. Was that it?
Having to separate your ethics from your faith is what one listener said.
See, and I think it depends on what kind of faith you have. And I think it depends on what ethics your particular faith has. I think we all pick and choose what we want to follow. But at a certain point, we have to come to a certain understanding of what is comfortable for us. And for those of us who do not follow dogma to the letter, as I am one of those, who do see... I do see Christianity as a flexible faith, more full of metaphors than actually laws per se. Then I am able to look at certain scriptures and say, okay, I can apply this to polyamory. So I don't think...
Ooh, like what scriptures?
You would ask that, wouldn't you? Interestingly enough, stuff from Paul. Paul wrote a letter, I believe it's in, God, and I quoted it to a friend of mine recently. I don't remember exactly which scripture, but basically it starts off, Beloved, therefore, if thou love me, if thou love God, then thou shalt be able to love thyself. I actually posted, I'll have to point you out to the particular letter I wrote to a friend of mine. But where you have all this talk, particularly in the New Testament, about the power of love, about how strong love is,
right.
About how love is this esoteric, wonderful feeling, then for the church to turn around, or for any of us to turn around and say, no, you must limit it, because if you love too many people, it's wrong. Yet we see quite the opposite has been proven time and time again. I think when you take love as, and we're, not everyone's into poly for the love, I know. Some people are in it for the sex. So, but strictly on the love aspect, when you truly embrace love as Jesus taught it, as being a unconditional type of free-flowing type of no limits type thing, not only romantically, but for your family, for your friends, for your neighbors, for your community, then I think you are able to tap in more to a different aspect of it. And therefore your ethics, if your ethics are rooted in love, then it all becomes compatible.
Actually, now that I think about it, that whole loaves and fishes thing, really a polyamorous metaphor. What do you think?
Well, yeah, you could say making, feeding thousands of people out of, just a loaf of bread is very interesting. But,
it's about abundance. That's what you were saying, love without limits.
Exactly.
That particular parable is, about faith, but it's about abundance. It's about creating abundance out of what you have.
And considering that what you just mentioned happened at a wedding, it was,
gasp.
Yes, it was at a wedding, so that's when that was the first miracle.
Loaves and fishes was at the wedding? I thought the wine to water was at a wedding.
Oh,
or the water to wine.
Right.
Water to wine's at a wedding. Loaves and fishes was at the...
I always think about the bread.
After he was preaching on the mountain or something like that.
But even if we go back to the water to wine.
Water to wine at a wedding.
At a wedding.
Many people used to show, hey, Jesus liked to party.
Well, some people say that was actually Jesus' wedding, but...
Gasp.
You might want to cut that one out too. I don't want people coming after me for that one. I get in enough trouble. But the fact that when you're talking about the abundance, the fact that Jesus' first public miracle was actually one of abundance, was one of turning water into wine, of satisfying the all of the celebrants who were there. During a celebration of love, basically, that's what we're talking about. And when it all comes, for me, everything in polyamory, even if you don't fall in love with someone, it's still about, love. I read something of a guy who's in a poly, he's kind of in a triad, and he hasn't had sex with his wife for the first time, like, this year, like a couple of days ago. But that doesn't mean he loves his wife any less. And in fact, if you read him correctly, he loves his wife even more. Mm-hmm. I mean, we tie, and the problem is we allow polyamory to be confused with sex. And we allow our religious people to say, well, if you're in love with, people, you're being sinful because you're having too much sex. But it's not about, for me, and the concept of it has never been about sex. And I think we need to adjust the focus.
Well, and I think part of the issue, too, is, as Janet Hardy and Dossie Easton referred to in their interview, is that, the line between sex and not sex is really very slim.
Right.
And, they actually don't very much believe in differentiating between the two at all. It's like, for example, Janet, we gave the example of a scene that she did with Great Answer Myself, where we all had our clothes on, there was no groping or touching of anything, any sexual organs at all, and yet we would definitely say that was a very strong, very powerful sexual contact.
Exactly.
So this sort of, line between, well, if you love someone, that's okay, but if you have sex with somebody, it isn't.
Right. I mean, and nowhere in any religious text I've ever heard of has it ever restricted who you can love or how many people you can actually love. What it says is you can't sleep around, you're not supposed to commit adultery, you're not supposed to lust after people, but never does it say that, love has to be limited. So because we're in an area where we're saying our expressions of love are not limited, and we have the ability to experience love that is unlimited. But there are people who are intimidated by that, either because they're jealous because they wish they could, or because they don't understand how, or maybe they're just hardwired monogamous, and therefore, the one thing I've always said, and talking about...
I would add to that, threatened because they've been hurt in the past, too. It's really hard to understand polyamory if, for example, you have been a victim of a horrible adultery. It's really hard to think polyamory is healthy if you've been cheated on in a horrendous, lying, unethical way.
But people are cheated on in the context of polyamory.
That's true.
So,
I mean... You can break agreements, you can lie, and...
We are not immune from that.
Absolutely.
I went through that myself.
I'm sorry to hear that.
I think, hey, I'm a lot better for it now. But I think when it boils down to it, that when we start moving the focus into explaining to people... No, what I was going to say earlier, I remember. I always used to say to people, I've had a lot of fellow Christians come up to me and, or not come up to me, but come up to other people and say, you should be a Christian and you should give up all your sinning ways. But I have never met one poly person who has tried to make everyone else into being poly. And I think the difference, I haven't.
I think not necessarily, but I think sometimes, as we mentioned before, there can be sort of a, not necessarily trying to convert people, but I'm poly and I'm a better person than you because of that.
Okay.
And be holier than thou.
Right. Okay. We do have those. Yes. I'll have to give you that. The whole, are poly people more evolved?
I'm more enlightened than you are.
Yes, I am, because I can do more. But I don't see the evangelistic nature of it, where you would, some people may get on their high horse every now and then.
Yeah.
But I don't think overall we don't try to force it on people. I haven't.
I don't.
And I have not. And maybe as I get more into it with more of you crazy people, I'll experience more of that. But so far, I have not experienced that. I've experienced more tolerance from the poly people I know who will say poly is not for everyone. And I think maybe that's one of the things that we do need to put forth also, is that not everyone should be. Yeah. And we should encourage some people, no, this is not for you. But there is the conception, just like with some people regarding homosexuals who say, oh, they want to turn everyone gay. I think the same fear comes with poly people, that we want to convert everyone to being poly and have one big, giant, worldwide group marriage orgy type thing. And
God, that would be complicated.
and it would be most unpleasant in some areas.
Yeah, I would think so.
But I do think it comes down to the focus we put on it, and correlating the two. Between polyamory and spirituality, saying that this helps to accentuate my own spirituality or my own relationships, because for many of us it does, and to not be afraid of explaining that.
Well, what I'm hearing a lot of from you is that that spirituality and polyamory is personal. It gives you your own unique personal type of spirituality that whatever works for you, you define it. But the thing is, I always thought that was true. Even when I, back in my Bible-thumping Christian days myself, I always said that because I was very curious, and I read the Bible way too much, and read the letters of Paul so many times, took classes on it. I mean, really. And I was just really curious, and and the conclusion I came to is really that there are as many different types of Christianity as there are Christians.
There are.
That it
Indeed.
is, the more people I talk to, the more I realize just because somebody's Christian doesn't mean they believe the same things that I do.
Exactly.
Or even that they believe the things that they had to say when they joined the church. I mean, I had to say a lot of stuff that I was like, I'm not really comfortable with this, but I want to join the church, so I'll just say it, and nobody takes it seriously.
Well, I mean, I've preached on things before where I wasn't 100% comfortable with them, but because I was trying to be the prim and proper minister, those are the things I felt I had to preach on. But oddly enough, I've never, in my over 10 years of ministry, because I've actually been in longer before I got ordained, I've never preached a sermon on adultery.
Really?
Because I used to commit adultery before I became poly. So, here's an example of the hypocrisy of the church as it comes to poly. When I was leaving my ex-wife, when my ex-wife and I were separating, and I went to one of my church elders and told him what he told me. Now, this is a man who baptized me, married my parents, baptized my son, married my grandparents, the whole 9 yards. I've been a minister for longer than God almost. But he told me, well, you just need to go on and get you a woman on the side and stay with your wife because ministers shouldn't be divorced. And true story, and I tell the story all the time.
So he told you to give in to your lust and commit adultery rather than get divorced.
Right.
And you're not even Catholic.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
But my partner is. But that's another story.
My jaw is dropping. I can't believe your minister told you that.
Yes, he did. And he was dead serious. And what makes it more interesting is he had carried on a 40-year affair with someone very, very close to me. And so...
He just mouthed to me who it was. So I just went jaw-dropping. Anyway, continue.
So I think back upon that, where it was more important for me to give the appearance of being in a happy marriage when I wasn't, and everyone knew I wasn't, but it was acceptable for me to go out and commit adultery, even though one of the top 10 in Exodus, thou shalt not commit adultery.
I can't believe you dropped this. We're half an hour into the interview. We both need to go, and you dropped this on me now. I should have asked about adultery first off. I'm sitting here trying to talk about spirituality and ethics, and what the hell? Let's just talk about adultery.
I am a sadist.
He's torturing me here in the coffee shop, and nobody's even looking at me funny.
But I do think, and I mean, since you brought that up, I mean, let's distinguish. I mean, I'm out to my mother about being poly, and the one thing that I said is because my primary partner, for lack of a better term for context of this discussion, is married. And I said, we are not committing adultery. Her husband knows me. Her husband and I are friends. So therefore, since he knows, he's very well informed. How is that adultery? Since adultery really is deception, is deceiving your partner, and is to going about basically sneaking behind their back. That's not what polyamory is about. Therefore, I do not see poly qualifying in the terms of adultery.
Yeah, that's what I've always maintained, is that the reason that adultery, I would think, would be forbidden, and the reason I would think it would be unethical is because it involves lying, it involves deception.
Right.
And, I can't tolerate either of those things, so I'm okay with things being forbidden if they involve lying and deception. However, yeah, I mean, it's okay to sleep with somebody's, wife, husband, what have you, if they're all okay, if you're sending, nice text messages and pictures back. I mean, I think that's just fine. And you're writing an LJ afterwards, how great it was.
Exactly, and showing pictures of it.
Exactly.
But yet, I think if we were very honest about the very nature of what adultery represents and how it is applied, how that it is applied to polyamorous relationships, and how we allow it to be applied, and that's part of the other problem. We have to make the distinction that because adultery, I mean, let's be real, we have an obscenely high divorce rate in this country. Mm-hmm. And what are the two biggest reasons for divorce? Money and sex. And when sex is involved,
or
you usually...
sex for money.
Or sex for money, yes, of course. Or money for sex. But when you factor in how many divorces take place because of adultery, how many people sometimes will say, if he had only told me, if she had only come to me and talked to me about it,
right.
Why did she have to lie? Why did he have to deceive me? It takes on a different aspect. So what I say in the context of poly is, I'm being honest about what I do. I'm not doing what I used to do when I was married, when I cheated rampantly. But now I'm being open and honest with anyone I'm involved with. And yet somehow this honesty is wrong. It would be better for me to get married and take a mistress than to carry on the relationships that I do. I don't get that.
Well, when you say better, you mean more acceptable within your religion, which...
Not only religion, but also within society. Remember,
Well, a lot of that, society I can understand, because society has these paradigms where
Right.
they understand having a mistress. They understand you're married. They think they understand, because they're like, oh, I'm married. I get bored. I understand what he's doing, and I understand why he's doing it, because they can relate to that. When you say polyamory and being upfront and being honest about everything, and maybe even being there, being present
Right.
when love and or sex is taking place, people really don't get that because it's beyond the realm of experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people would rather, either they have a double standard. I have one friend who he cheated on his wife, and when his wife cheated on him, all of a sudden it was wrong. Go figure.
Yeah. Can I just say how much that burns me?
But yet, a lot of my friends look at me and they cannot believe the relationships that I have with, the other people that my partner is involved with. It's inconceivable because we are taught to lie. We
Yeah.
are taught to be deceitful and deceptive, and to say, hey, I'm dating you, and I'm dating someone over here, and I'm in love with someone over here. All of a sudden, that's wrong. So we're being penalized for being honest.
It's true. Whenever, on the rare occasions when I come out to someone as poly these days, because mostly the people I want to know, but
You're coming out to the coffee shop right now.
Yeah, I know. Hi, how you doing? I can't tell how loud I'm talking because I have earphones on, so I'm probably broadcasting quite loudly. The first question I'm asked almost always is, someone asks, "Are you seeing anybody? Do you have a boyfriend?" And I say, "Well, actually, I have two." Guess what the next question always is?
What?
Do they know about each other?
Right.
Always, 100%, every single time, do they know about each other?
Yeah.
And I think that's so symptomatic of the society we live in, that they just,
Well,
that's the first thing they would think of, is that, they would assume that I'm lying.
right. And I'm dating best friends.
So, do they know about it? No.
No, I don't think they know about each other.
I don't think they know they exist.
No, they don't. They don't.
Well, I would love to continue this, but you've got to get off and pack because you're going on a trip.
Yes, I
and
am.
I have to get back and do another interview for another podcast. So, parting thoughts?
Just love one another more. That's all I have to say. That's what it's all
It's in
about.
the Bible, love one another.
That's it. That's true. Live for love. There you go.
There you go. All right, thanks, Men of Sin, for joining us and
Thank
for
you.
expostulating, and we'll talk about Paul later on.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And by the way, just so you know, when he mentioned editing that part out about the water to wine trick being at Christ's own wedding, I did talk with him afterwards, and he did give me permission to leave that in. Just so you know, I don't disregard the wishes of the interviewees. But thanks again to Men of Sin for taking the time to sit down and share his ideas. Also along those lines, Brent wrote in about polyamory and spirituality, and he wrote a great email last week, and of course I can't find it now, but he wrote another really good one, so I thought I'd throw this in as well. He says, in my tradition of Wicca, which I think is very, very compatible with polyamory, we sum all of our moral values up in 5 simple statements. 1, the Wiccan Rede. And it harm none, do what thou wilt. Note that this doesn't say harm none. It says if it's going to cause harm, you've got to think about it a bit. Weigh the options. 2, the law of return. Whatever you do will return to you. 3, the ethic of constant improvement. I have a responsibility to be the best me I can be. 4, the ethic of self-responsibility. When I screw up, it's my fault. Blaming malevolent spirits, phases of the moon, or Mercury in retrograde isn't okay. Damn, and here I was going to blame demons for all my behavior. Shoot. 5, the ethic of divine attunement. Always, always, always recognize the divine spark in everything around you. And see, that's really hard for me. Sometimes I'm not particularly, look, here's a truck. I'm not particularly Wiccan or pagan, but I am pagan friendly. And recognizing the divine spark in somebody that I'm in the middle of an argument with and that I'm really, really pissed at is really, really hard. So that's a good one to remember. He continues that the last paragraph was, so why do we care about other people's ethics? There is safety in numbers, and we know that if people agree with us, we must be doing things right. So it's pretty hard to be on the margins, and you want to huddle up with others who feel exactly the same as you do. And I agree with that we as humans, we tend to be drawn to people who are like us, to people who are at least within the realm of the things that we believe. I think that's just naturally human. And I think that teaching ourselves tolerance is actually very difficult because we do fear the unknown. We do fear people who are different from us. So it actually does take a little bit of work. All right, well, it seems like my car is ready to come out of the shop. So just one more announcement before we go. You guys might remember one of our previous interview guests, Michelle Bélanger, and all of her fabulous books on vampires and vampire erotica. Well, her new book, Sacred Hunger, is out. First of all, she will be signing copies at Hex Hollywood, www.hexhollywood.com on October 31st. And I'm not sure where that is, so look it up. We'll put the link in the show notes, which is at www.livejournal.com/users/polyweekly. And the book itself is available at Lulu, www.lulu.com/content/172984. It's for $16.95. And I'll just read her little bio here if you haven't listened to that particular cast yet. Author Michelle Bélanger has fascinated and informed readers about the vampire in folklore, fiction, and fact since the early 90s. Now enjoy all of Michelle's major essays on this fascinating topic, collected for the first time in one volume. Find out why author Bram Stoker wrote about vampires and what real-life psychic vampire inspired the figure of Dracula. Learn about the history and development of the modern community of real vampires. Explore the allure of the vampire in modern culture and meet members of the vampire underground who have made this potent archetype a fundamental part of their lives. Yeah, that's all in Sacred Hunger, available at lulu.com. And now that I'm back at home with my car safely working properly again, a few more things that I forgot I had wanted to mention. First of all, I did do an interview with the Spanish Language Swingers podcast, and that is available, which will be translated into Spanish. So if anybody speaks Spanish and wants to know my thoughts on polyamory versus swinging, you can find that at www.radiomenteabierta.com. Okay, that was just fun to say. It's www.radio-menteabierta.com. And I did the interview in English, and apparently they are going to work very hard to translate it into Spanish. So check that out. Also, for those of you who found out, if you've been reading the show blog, you know that a few weeks ago I was contacted by a reporter to comment on polyamory, or is monogamy vanishing? Well, since then the reporter has emailed me that she's apparently decided not to do the article because she couldn't find anyone who would agree to have her name and photograph taken, which I found very odd because I told her that my name was Minx, and of course she could send a photographer out, no problem with that at all, and I'd be happy to give her and her editor my real name and any other materials they might need to verify that yes, indeed, Minx is a real live person and she didn't make up the source. As a matter of fact, when she told me that, many people offered to go on the record and to be interviewed as well. To my knowledge, she has not contacted any of them. I'm suspecting that the story simply wasn't sensational enough for her, or maybe she just got lazy. Who knows? Anyway, so if you're waiting for that article, don't. It's not coming out. Another quick thought that I'd throw out before we close out the show, I am in the process of submitting proposals for seminars for a couple of poly conferences that are coming up. However, I have discovered that apparently, in addition to waiving my normal fee for speaking, which is around about just under $2,000 a day, apparently most of the poly conferences don't tend to pay travel expenses or even let you into the conference for free. So I'm debating how I can best get the word out about poly at conferences. So we might be that might be a topic in future shows. We might do some fundraising here on the show so that I could go out to some conferences. We'll see. Just kind of wanted to mention that today. At any rate, questions, comments, feedback, email me, CUNNINGMINX, that's cunningminx, @gmail.com, or you can always call the listener comment line at Area code 206-600-5677. Love hearing your thoughts, and I'm happy to read listener mail on the air as much as time permits. Also, if you'd like to simply attach an MP3 file, an audio comment to your regular email, I'll be happy to do that and play that on the air. Thanks again very much for listening. Thanks for your feedback and for keeping the dialogue going. And remember, guys, it's not all about the sex.
It's a